My pleasure to do so. So, Nathan H. Lentz, PhD, is professor of biology and director of the Cell and Molecular Biology program at John Jay College of the City University of New York. He's also a visiting professor of forensic science at the University of Lincoln in the UK and an elected fellow of the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry. Oh, I know those people. Dr. Lentz's research explores the evolution of the human genome and the genetics of human uniqueness. He published over 40 research articles and book chapters, and his work has been funded by the National Institutes of Health, the National Science Foundation, and the U.S. Department of Education, all of which may be going away soon. I heard rumors. Professor Lentz is also a very busy science writer. He blogs for Psychology Today and maintains the Human Evolution blog. And his musings on human origins have appeared in Science, The Wall Street Journal, The Huffington Post, The Guardian, The Observer, Skeptic Magazine, Skeptical Inquirer, and others. He's also the author of several popular science books, one being Not So Different, Finding Human Nature in Animals, and Human Errors, a panorama of our glitches from pointless bones to broken genes. And his latest book is The Sexual Evolution, How 500 Million Years of Sex, Gender, and Mating Shape Modern Relationships. Welcome back, Nathan.
You will need to unmute yourself.
There we go. It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to be back. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming back. I see we didn't scare you off the first time, and
Nah.
you have made good on your promise to come back and tell us about your next book, which I have been waiting for so excitedly, and you did not disappoint. So I cannot tell you how excited I am for this discussion. I have told you that, but anyway, I'm excited for tonight's discussion. I cannot wait.
All right. Thank you. Shall I get started?
Or do
Yes,
we want to
please.
look at the poll questions first? What do you think? What do you
Oh, you
think?
want to look at the
Okay.
polls? Okay.
All right, let's do the poll questions. Okay, so a little bit of a teaser. So the first question that we asked was, do non-human animals have gender? And wow, I am surprised. 60% of people answered yes to that. 6% of people said no, and 34% said, I don't know. Now, Nathan, how does this fit with the answer that you normally encounter to this question?
I think it's about what I usually get. Yeah.
Okay. Ooh, that's interesting. Because something we noticed in some of the advertising and social media posts about the program leading up to it was some people were kind of arguing this point, and I know I certainly remember when I was in grad school, this was a big point of contention for some folks that did not like the idea of gender being applied to animals. Animals are biological, humans are social, and that's where we leave it, which is, I don't agree with that, but some people do. Okay, well, we'll get more into that a little later on in the show. Next question we asked was, what is the purpose of sex? And this was a multiple answer choice question. So the percentages obviously do add up to more than 100%. 46% of people did select reproduction, but the same number of people also selected social bonding. Conflict resolution got 26% of respondents. Dominance got 17%. Affiliation and alliance building got 29%. Fun only got 43%. That's lower than reproduction, y'all. Wow. Okay. 69% of people selected all of the above, and 3% of people selected none of the above. And I don't know if they put it in the chat or not, but I want to know what the other purposes that we left.
What did we miss?
List.
We always miss one, and maybe we missed one. I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, thoughts on this question, Nathan or Rob, on the responses?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're gonna get to some of this. I'm curious who thinks none of the above.
Yeah, and what else did we miss? A category that even
Oh, we might have missed several, but
yeah, but none of the above.
And none,
okay.
Just the other thing, and none of these. That's really interesting. Okay,
I like it. I want to hear more about this. Okay, and then the third question, the last question, is always the most important one. It's our silly fun question, and that was which species does drag the best? And the winner was humans with 45% of responses. Wow, we're winning 2 weeks in a row. I think we won last week as well with the question about, or maybe that was 2 weeks ago.
I don't remember that. What was it?
Question about something about what's your favorite species that has non-binary options for
Okay.
gender. Wow, okay, we're winning 2 weeks in a row. Okay, next up was birds of paradise at 30%. Cuttlefish got a respectable 9%. Whiptail lizards came in at 3%. Oh, decorator crabs were just ahead at 6%. And then another 6% went for something else. That's another one I would love to
Nobody
know.
liked the garter snake's choice, Nathan.
Oh, wow. And
You have to tell us
Nathan,
about garter snakes later.
yeah, can you tell us about the garter snakes?
Well, I will just say it's one of the few species in which female mimicry, I buy it as accurate description. So I would say that's the most correct choice, the one that nobody
Ooh.
picked.
Oh man, y'all, we're not doing great on tonight's quiz. But we're gonna know so much more by the end of the evening, though. I cannot wait. Okay, well, I'm gonna look forward to that, and I will stop sharing.
So is the garter snake thing in your talk, Nathan, or you want to tell us now?
It's not in the talk, but it is in the book. And what I will say about it is that when garter snakes emerge from hibernation, the first thing they do is have a big old orgy of sex. It's called a mating ball, and they're all in there having sex with each other. Well, males that will emerge a little bit late, so they're kind of behind the ball, will sometimes emit female pheromones, which causes the other males to swarm them and have sex with them like crazy, thinking that they're a female. And what that does is it tires out their competition, and it also steals their body heat so that these latecomers will warm up more quickly and then go and take the females from the males who were fooled from them.
Clever.
Oh, that reminds me. We could have also maybe put bed bugs. I remember that section in the book as well, emitting the scent that confuses the other males that are trying to mate with them violently.
Yeah, we're
Terrifying.
not sure if that's really mimicry or if it's just a signal saying, please stop that.
Which, I don't blame them for coming up with the signal for that. I would also be emitting that signal. Please stop that.
Because bed bugs inseminate each other with by piercing the abdomen with their penis, which is injurious often, but that's the only way that a female can be inseminated. And of course, males will inseminate other males competitively.
Just not very successfully, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, if the goal is reproduction, but remember, that's not always the goal.
That may not be the goal. That's right. So they may have been very successful at their goal if it was to stab somebody in the abdomen. Well, on that note, let's learn more about sex and gender diversity in the animal world.
Okay, we ready?
I think we're ready.
Okay, let me see if I got to do this in the right order. Share and then go to full screen. Can you see my screen full?
Yes, we are
And you
just
see me,
seeing the slide.
and depending on your view, you might also see me waving my hand.
I'm going
You
to
don't really need to
spotlight
see
you.
me for this talk, but since I'm kind of expressive,
Yeah, for people who don't know, up in the upper right, at least on a PC, there's a view, and you can pick between 4 different views to see what you want to go on besides looking at Nathan's slides.
Okay. All right, so let's get started here. I want to begin by telling you a story. I live in New York City, the concrete jungle, but one of my favorite sounds is the sounds of crickets chirping. It reminds me that life is all around us, and when we're outdoors, we're just surrounded by life. Life is everywhere, and life is noisy and sexual. And as we all know, it's the male crickets that chirp, and they're trying to, attract the females. It's part of their courtship. And they do that, contrary to popular belief. They don't do it with rubbing their legs together. They do it by rubbing their wings against their thorax. And they have the males have these jagged edges to their wings, like a saw, and they grind that against the thorax, and you get this resonant sound from the hollow spaces in their thorax. And that's cricket chirping. Sounds like a wonderful sexual signal. Well, it turns out in the early 2000s, a species of cricket started to disappear the island of Oahu in Hawaii. And the crickets were disappearing rapidly. In a couple of years, the population was devastated. And not too long after, the biologists took a look and they figured out what it was. There was a parasitic fly that had invaded, and like most invasive species, had no natural predators. And this parasitic fly lands on the crickets and injects its eggs inside the body of the crickets, which then hatch, and the larvae eat the crickets from the inside out, killing them in the process. And this invasive fly decimated the population for a few years. However, it didn't take more than that before the population actually recovered. The biologists noticed that the crickets came back. But when they came back, they were silent. The crickets that recovered from this invasive parasitic fly no longer chirped. And the reason why is that that's how the parasitic fly was finding the crickets, is they were following the chirping and homing in on it, and that's how they used to attack the crickets. This story was widely reported a few years later, in 2008, when another cricket species underwent the exact same process on another Hawaiian island. So the same parasitic fly reached another island in Hawaii, decimated the cricket population, but that cricket population also recovered and came back silent. The interesting part among geneticists is that it followed two very different genetic routes. That's not really interesting for our conversation today. What is interesting is that the evolution of these silent male crickets saved them from local extinction. One part, and this was widely reported in the news, and you can see the scientific news. So this is Science Magazine. Can you see my pointer, by the way? Because I'll use it if you can see it. Okay.
Yes,
so
yes,
Nature Magazine, Science Magazine, these are two of the top scientific journals. And then, of course, the popular press. This was reported all over the place. And you see the date is 2014 because that's when the second event happened again. So it became newsworthy that the same thing had happened again in terms of convergent evolution. However, as fascinating as this is the original report. One part of the story is consistently left out of all of these news papers, these news reports, that was present in the original discovery back in 2006. So this is the morph of normal males, the chirping males, the loud males, and then they described the silent males as very similar to female wings in that they had the smooth rather than the jagged edge. If you don't know about cricket wings, which I don't, these pictures won't mean a lot to you. But the part of the story that was always left out is that crickets have always had a subpopulation of males that don't chirp. So this is a morph, a version of males called satellite males, which were discovered as far back as 2006, which are known to be, which are reported as far back as 1980. And satellite males are associates of chirping males that will often court them, work together with them, and then together court females. Now, these satellite males are present in many species. They're a variety of male that often pursues reproductive success in a different way other than the larger and more dominant, and in this case, more noisy males. The satellite male is a feature that you're going to see in species that I described throughout my book. Only in this particular example, did anyone bother to actually research these satellite males. So we've known about them since about 1980. They became famous in 2006 and beyond. Why? Because the presence of these silent males represented what we call standing variation. They didn't have to wait around for a new mutation to silence these males. Silent males already existed in the population, and because they did, natural selection could reward them with success by escaping the parasitized, the parasitic flies, and then the loud, noisy crickets were lost from the population. So I propose this as an example of gender variation within the sex of males in crickets. Now, because the scientists finally were aware of these crickets and started studying them more closely, they started realizing that cricket populations around the world engage in same-sex sexual behavior. So these are two male crickets, a silent male and a chirping male, not in Hawaii. And what they found is that these males are a standing part of cricket populations all over the world. And there has been, subsequent to these discoveries, all kinds of explanations for why they might exist. Some of them are rather silly. Some of them are confused. Some of them call them inaccurate mate choice. The bottom line is these are almost always described as with pejorative words, even among the scientists themselves, notwithstanding the fact that silent males saved the cricket population from extinction on not one but two Hawaiian islands. So before we go and dismiss the presence of these silent males as suboptimal or inaccurate or paradoxical, we can note that gender diversity is actually an important part of cricket ecology. And the reason why crickets exist, at least in these Hawaiian islands, is because they had that standing variation within the genders. But let's dig a little deeper into these crickets. It turns out that the calling that males do is directed at other males. It turns out the females are not at all even interested in cricket calls. And we know this because since 1978, it's been known that deaf females are unaffected by lack of chirping. So in other words, they're not responding to the chirping at all. And what you have to and what cricket biologists will tell you is that there's chirping, which is called a call, a courtship call, but there are also courtship songs. And calls are very generic, very loud. They're as simple as, hey, I'm here. But in close proximity, crickets will also sing. It's something that we can barely hear, but it shows much more variation from individual to individual. And that seems to be what females respond to. The long calls, the loud calls seem to be more directed at other males. So what we could be seeing in cricket chirping is same-sex courtship that then leads to opposite-sex courtship in a partnership. We've seen that even without the presence of a parasitic fly, the obligately silent males, so these are those satellite males, actually have more offspring than the chirpers do. And when a male cricket is in poor health, he does less same-sexual behavior, not more. There's every reason to believe that this is an important part of cricket ecology and cricket behavior. Silent males have always existed, and they seem to be maintained in the population for various reasons. Now, before I go on and explain more about my book and why gender diversity is important, I need to stop and give credit to Joan Roughgarden. Joan Roughgarden first presented these ideas that she calls the gender diversity framework, which I now call the Roughgarden gender diversity framework. She first presented these ideas in her magnum opus at the early part of this century in a book called Evolution's Rainbow. The scientific community responded to this in the most deplorable way you can imagine. She wasn't just criticized, she was insulted, she wasn't just challenged, she was mocked, she was ostracized from the community, including from her own colleagues in the biology department at Stanford University. She largely retreated from public life after her op-ed was published in Nature magazine and all of the barbs came out. But in just a little example of how much the world has changed in the last 25 years, my book, which espouses many of the same ideas just with updated examples, was positively reviewed by Science magazine last month. So I'm very proud. I'm proud of that review, but I'm also very proud that the biological community has come around to recognizing diversity in sexualized forms and sex bodies as actually an important part of animal behavior and animal biology. So now let me get into what my book is really about. These questions are the answers to these questions form the first 5 chapters of my book. And I do this entirely looking at animal behavior, at least in the first 5 chapters. So what is biological sex? What is a male? What is a female? What does this mean? How does an animal become male versus female? That's what the first chapter of my book is about. And one thing, and I'll give you a little preview here in a minute, the one thing that you see throughout nature is there are really diverse answers to this question. How an animal becomes male or female, or what a male or female is actually dramatically different and diverse throughout the animal kingdom. I go from there to look at variation within the sexes, and I call that gender. And this is where there is some controversy because the field of biology typically hasn't been interested in gender. But Joan Roughgarden herself pioneered the use of the word gender in biological context to mean diversity within a sex. So what I mean by sex is maleness or femaleness and how that works between species. But what I mean by gender is variations of maleness within a sex or within a species. So different flavors of male, different versions of male, different versions of female within a species or within a sex. So that's what chapter 2 of my book is all about. And again, I really critique the notion that many biologists have long supported is that there's an archetypical male and an archetypical female. There's an ideal male or ideal female. That's just not true. What we see in most social animals is a variety of male strategies and male bodies even, and female strategies and female bodies. And these are innate biological differences, not just reproductive strategies, but actually the way that they're built can be quite different. I go from there to attack sexuality and the notion of sexual orientation or sex drive. In general, there's a lot of this chapter is about same-sex sexual behavior because that's the behavior that, for a variety of reasons, seems like it needs defending. Whereas nobody is confused about a male and female animal having sex. We are often confused when we see two females engaging in sexual behaviors. So what I do in that chapter is explain all the many reasons why same-sex sexual behavior exists in animals. And importantly, this is the part that I think is very important about this chapter, is what the animal gains from this. It is not an aberrant behavior. It's not an accident. It's not mistaken identity. It's not confusion. It's not female mimicry, or at least can't be boiled down to only that. Actually, there's really good reasons and good benefits for same-sex sexual behavior. I then talk about monogamy, and I demolish the notion that sexual fidelity is a key part of monogamy. Animals pair up very often. Birds are famous for pairing up, but actually sexual fidelity very rarely flows from that. The idea that sexual monogamy and economic monogamy or social monogamy, the idea that those are tied together is actually really a human construction, and actually a fairly recent human construction. Of all the mammal species out there, I think there's 6,200 mammal species. We've only discovered sexual fidelity in 6 of them. Sorry, 8 of them. So 8 out of 6,000 are actually sexually exclusive in their monogamy. And then this all leads us to the question is, why do we have sex in the first place? Why does sex exist? What do animals get out of it as a species, as individuals? And there's really diverse and surprising answers to that question as well. The idea that sex is primarily for procreation, it's just not true. Not in humans and not in other animals. We have sex for a whole variety of reasons and a variety of purposes. A variety of benefits come from having sex. And once you understand the many purposes of sexual behaviors, these other chapters start to make a lot more sense, because since sex is about much more than just fertilization, of course, there would be reasons why animals would have sex with each other without any possible fertilization. In fact, it would be weird that an animal would be averse to sex with an entire half of the population simply because it wouldn't be procreative. I mean, I ask you, how many times have you had sex in your life? How many times were those procreative or even hopefully procreative, right? A very, very small number. And in fact, if you look at chimpanzees, gorillas, lions, lots of other animals, they will have sex for procreative purpose, but that's a tiny minority of the number of sexual events in their lifetime. And I don't mean that because they are confused and they just don't get it right. They will have a little bit more sex during the fertile period, and animals are very aware when they're fertile, but they have plenty of sex all year, not just when they're in heat. And of course, anybody who's ever had a dog or a cat, it wouldn't be surprised by this. But anyway, so those are the 5 chapters where I deal with animal sexual diversity before I even get to the weirdest animal of all, which is human beings. So let's talk about biological sex first, because this is the one that I opened the book talking about, and that really leads to the most fundamental realities of the social life of sexual animals. What makes an animal male or female is very species dependent, and there's a lot of variety of this out in the animal kingdom. And let me just ask you, this is sort of an easy one, but here we have a seahorse giving birth. What do you think the sex of this seahorse is?
Ooh, I think I know this.
I'm sure the chat's probably lighting up.
It's the male, right? It's the male.
Yes, this is a male. The males give birth in seahorses. They have a pouch, a brood pouch, the equivalent of a womb, essentially a womb, and females deposit their eggs inside of a male's womb, where they are then inseminated or fertilized. The seahorses grow, and they will eventually hatch and then leave the womb. So this is vivipary, live birth, and the female's nowhere to be found after she deposits her eggs. So this is a species in which the male does all of the pregnancy and child rearing that at least that exists. Invertebrates don't do a lot of parenting, generally speaking, but here's one example where they do, and it's done entirely by the males. What species do you think this animal is? This is a spotted hyena. I would call your attention to that little appendage, or should I say that enormous appendage dangling from its abdomen. What sex do you think this creature is?
Oh, we learned about this recently. This is a female hyena, yes?
Yes, this is a female hyena. The reason I know at a glance is because only female hyenas have dicks that big. What you're seeing is a masculinized spotted hyena. The entire species has so much testosterone. Their circulating testosterone is so high that the female body is what we would consider masculinized.
So they have BDE then, as I understand the term to be.
BDE.
I love it, Rob.
I don't know that one.
Why don't you tell us, Rob? What is BDE?
Yeah, I think Republicans made this
envy,
famous
or...
like 3 or 4 years ago. They were talking about it all over the stages. Big dick energy.
Big dick energy. The females have big dick energy. And this is obviously an enlarged clitoris. With this much testosterone enlarges the clitoris. But I do use the term penis when describing it because they urinate through it. The urethra does go through it, unlike a clitoris. And so that kind of meets the definition of a penis. They also have sex with it, meaning one inside the other, and they give birth through it. Through it.
Oh.
Someone once asked me, how do they give birth through that? And the answer is painfully. Very, very painfully. If you think childbirth is hard in humans, it's worse in hyena. But this is what a female body is in a spotted hyena. There's nothing wrong with her. She's not aberrant or abnormal. She's certainly not unnatural. Spotted hyenas have existed this way for millions of years. And they demolish our notions of maleness and femaleness. But in this female-dominated matriarchal species is doing just fine. Well, actually, they're endangered now because of human activity, but not because of their masculinized bodies.
Now, I have to a sort of religious question here, and maybe you might not know. I don't know what your background is, but I'm sure Carr would know the answer. So humans have pain in childbirth because, Eve ate the apple. So what did
Correct.
the hyenas ever do?
I don't know. Maybe they had watermelons. They ate watermelons, and since that was a larger infraction, they had worse consequence.
That's a good possibility.
Yeah. I'm sure there's a religious answer to this.
You have to metaphorically now push a watermelon through a straw.
That's how my mom described childbirth.
There is a religious answer to this. The one that I always got from the Southern Baptist sort of evangelical background was, before the fall, before Eve ate the fruit and gave it to Adam, the world was perfect and all of the animals were vegetarians, first of all, and there was no painful childbirth. All that happened after the fall for all of the species, apparently. They all got punished.
Oh, that's great. Well, it's good to know. I've always wondered, and it's good to have the answer.
Now you know.
Makes perfect sense.
I'll ask for the reference on that later.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You'll be waiting a while. I'll get it right over to you. Don't worry.
Okay, next one. What is the sex of this creature? This is an eel, of course. North American eel. This is neither male nor female. This is sex unspecified. And in fact, many species of eels live the majority of their life sex unspecified, and they only determine one way or the other, male or female, meaning making large gamete or small gamete. They will only do that in the last year of their life. And in fact, part of the reason they do this, or one benefit of them doing this, is that they are responsive to environmental conditions. So if there are a lot of eels around, they favor male development. And if there are a lot of eels around, they will if there's not very many eels around, they will favor the female direction for sex determination. Because obviously you need more females for rebounding numbers and population growth. Whereas if there's already plenty of eels around, you would favor the competitive action of male development. So this species, like in many, males bear the brunt of competitive natural selection, where females bear the brunt of reproduction. As a general trend. So this is a sex unspecified animal.
So how do they do the count? How do they know this? How does an
So
individual
quorum sensing or population density is one of the great mysteries in terms of mechanism. We don't really know. We don't even know where these eels spawn, if you can believe that. And we've been North American eels. We've been chasing them for decades, and very little is known about this. Okay. Does anybody know the sex of this creature? This is a proboscis flatworm. So this is both male and female. Many invertebrates, in fact, the majority of invertebrates, if you don't count insects and spiders, the majority of insects, I'm sorry, the majority of invertebrates are hermaphroditic, or at least have hermaphroditic animals within their numbers. So this is a creature that has both a vulva for depositing eggs and a penis for depositing sperm, although he has or she has two penises. And in fact, when they mate and they come together, and just because they can make egg and sperm does not mean that they self-fertilize. They go to great lengths to avoid self-fertilization because that does not increase genetic diversity. In fact, it's an extreme form of inbreeding. And so you'd have the accumulation of recessive alleles. So they try not to mate with themselves. But what happens when two of these flatworms come together, interestingly, they still compete. There is still a sexual competition of who gets to inseminate, who gets to be on top, if you want to be crude about it. And the way that they fight is with their penises, and they both they have two of them, so they have two penises, and they fight like a sword duel with their two penises, and it's called penis fencing. Look that up if you want.
I'm disappointed that in Dr. Ray's talks on this sort of subject, we've never had a picture. He's never shown us a picture of their penises. We've duck penises up the wazoo, and he's never shown us the penises of these.
We need more. We need more penis pictures, I guess. We don't want to get censored, especially in this day and age.
Oh, we have had plenty of slideshows with penis pictures on here, so you go right ahead.
Okay.
We've seen so many duck penises on this show, thanks to Dr. Ray.
Oh, right. I always give an example when I talk about how birds don't have external genitalia, except waterfowl. The ducks definitely do.
A surprising amount.
Yeah. Does anybody know the sex of this animal? This is a deloid rotifer. And this is an animal. It's microscopic, but it is an animal. It's not a, algae or anything. Well, this is a female, and the reason I can tell at a glance is that the entire species is females. They only have females in the species. They only make the large gamete. That is their reproductive lifestyle, and they exist purely by cloning. Not parthenogenesis. That's another form of reproduction that I can talk about later. Does anybody know the sex of these two individuals? These are clownfish, of course.
Ooh,
Nemo and Dory.
You
Nemo
told us about
and
this
yeah.
in your book. If I understand correctly, the larger one is the female, right?
Correct. The one in front is the female, and the one in back is a male. The way I know this is that clownfish families will only have one female. Clownfish are all born male. And the only way that you ever get a female is if that individual lives long enough to be the oldest and therefore largest in the group. The largest and oldest fish in a group will always be a female. And then the rest of the family, the rest of the group, are a ranked series of males, alpha, beta, gamma, delta, ranked by age and size. They control their own growth so that they stay in line in an incredible amount of restraint, which it would be anti-Darwinian by every stretch of the imagination, but it is actually maintained. And what happens, if you live long enough, you can be the breeding male, the alpha male. And if the female is lost, the alpha male becomes the alpha female. The two oldest individuals are the only two that are allowed to breed, and they breed with each other. And the female will be replaced. Another animal becomes female only when the female is lost. So at the beginning of the movie, Finding Nemo, if you haven't seen it, I'm about to give away the opening scene. Nemo's mother is lost. And Nemo's father, Marlin, spends the rest of the movie looking for him, hence the title Finding Nemo. If the movie had been accurate, Marlin would have been Marlena by the time he found Nemo. She would be Nemo's mother by the time she found him. It takes about 30 days to complete that transition. But then they would have formed a breeding pair, and so it's probably a good thing that they didn't go for biological accuracy there. Anyway, this is a Komodo dragon, one of the largest lizards, perhaps the largest lizard in the world. They are an interesting species. There was a Komodo dragon in the Chester Zoo in the United Kingdom who was kept by itself for several years. You should not do this. Lizards are social animals, and social animals do not do well on their own. They shouldn't live on their own. But they did. They kept this creature alone for several years, and suddenly she laid an egg, and that egg hatched, and a perfectly viable, normal female Komodo dragon was hatched from there and grew up. And how did this Komodo dragon reproduce all by herself? It's a process called parthenogenesis that we used to think was only found in invertebrates. We're finding it in an increasing number of vertebrates are capable of unfertilized eggs um, doubling their chromosomes and becoming full-fledged individuals. This is not a good strategy because, as I said, it's an extreme form of inbreeding, but in a pinch. And so the reason why we're only observing this in captivity in zoos and things is precisely the point. It's not the desired form of reproduction. However, in a pinch, it's better than nothing.
So this is, in other words, a virgin birth.
A true virgin birth. And this has been found in several species of fish, including sharks, and as you can tell, several species of lizards as well. It's unclear how many vertebrates can do this. This is a bearded dragon, which is kept as pets, but they're of course also wild animals in Australia and other places. They have an interesting sex determination system that is controlled by temperature. They do have a chromosomal system, but high temperatures can override that chromosomal system and drive development towards the female direction. So this led to this crazy headline of climate change is causing dragons to change gender. Not sure exactly I would put it quite that way, but it is true that elevated temperatures are affecting many species. Turtles, several species of turtles are temperature sensitive in their sex determination as well. And the reason why I use this example and all of these examples, is to show that maleness and femaleness can be quite different across species, even in how it's determined. It's, our XY system is just one way to do it, and there's lots of ways out there. And in fact, many of those other ways are more creative, more adaptable, more diverse. And one thing to remember is that each of them had a beginning to each of these forms that might have been considered freakish or unusual. It was a mutant, but it led to a new way of forming maleness and femaleness. And I think that's something to keep in mind, that innovation in biology always begins with a mutation, with a difference, with a variant. And while most variants are probably, don't represent a benefit to the species or to the individual, occasionally good variation does come. And so diversity is in general a good insurance plan for a species to have. So that's the chapter. Those are some of the examples in my chapter about sex and sex determination and maleness and femaleness. It's an incredibly complicated situation in other animals.
Okay, so quick question.
Mm-hmm.
One of our co-hosts is a bearded dragon. Can you tell by looking the sex of this guy? This
No, I
dragon?
certainly can't. Again, lizards tend not to have. I'm not sure about bearded dragons, but I don't believe they have external genitalia. They have a cloaca, right? Do you see anything? Yeah.
Fair
Yeah,
enough.
so generally lizards don't have penises, so you can't really tell. They have cloaca and their gametes, are squirted out, whether it's sperm or egg.
Sometimes there's a little bit of a bulge down there, but Axel doesn't have that, so I don't know. It's not a sure thing.
Not sure. Raise the temperature and you'll get a female.
Yeah,
I'm kidding.
he's male. He would have passed eggs. It would have been a huge freaking problem. So
Yeah.
Love it.
I
Okay.
thought whenever earlier in there, I thought that was a bearded dragon, but I didn't want to be wrong. Okay, so now let's talk about gender, which as I define it is variations on maleness and femaleness within the sexes for different species. And I want to point out that the satellite male morph is not unique to crickets. I mentioned this before, but it turns out that satellite males are actually common across lots of different species. And what that means is a lot of females will be attracted to, the largest male, dominant male, or paired males. So a lot of times in species that are territorial and that are mutually aggressive among males, one strategy is to go it alone and try to win every fight, but another strategy is to pair up with another male. And that pairing up often follows a courtship ritual and a courtship behaviors. And so this is same-sex sexual behavior. The reason why I mention this as a gender is that a lot of times this is an inborn biological difference. So a satellite male is born as a satellite male and will be different no matter what. It is not just a reproductive strategy. It's not just frustration. These are not just runts or submissive males. It's another kind of male, and they're born as such. As you know, only male lions have manes, except for when females have them also. And in fact, the numbers vary, but between 10 and 20% of females have manes. We're not exactly sure what this variation means because, like a lot of the other stories I'll tell here, scientists basically ignore it. They don't know what it means. They don't know why they have it. They've always considered the mane a sexual signal, but yet a minority of females carry that sexual signal of maleness, and we don't know exactly what that means. When it comes to bluegill sunfish, this figure is drawn because it's from my book. There are actually 3 varieties of males, and we don't really know about the females because, as Lucy Cook's book teaches us all, female behavior is often understudied or just outright ignored in animals. But we know that there are 3 varieties of male sunfish. So bluegill sunfish, you guys all know this fish. It's one of the most abundant fishes in freshwater lakes and streams in North America. Scientists spent decades only studying one variety of male, who is the largest male. We'll call him the large males. And it was honestly believed that these smaller males were simply juveniles, but it's not true. So the largest males, which represent about 40% of the male population, do not become sexually mature until they're 7 or 8 years old, which is close to the end of their lifespan. So they live for a long time as juveniles that are not reproductive. Whereas, for example, the smallest males become reproductively capable in only 3 years. Now, these large males are the ones that the scientists study. They build a nest. They spend about 2 weeks trying to attract a female by building a big nest. Now, the males are mutually aggressive and territorial, but they still school together when they build nests. So there's tension, right? They want to build the biggest nest they can, but they're in a big huddle, and so one nest will encroach on another one, and so they fight each other. And the goal is to have the best nest because the females prefer the best nest. What the best nest is the largest and most central. So in a big lek, and that's what we call these leks of nests. The central ones are the most protected from predators, from egg predators who might want to eat the eggs. And so the females want to go to the big guys in the middle. So the guys who are closer to the outside have figured out that if they pair up with one of these medium males, and these are called satellite males, that together they can successfully court females. So, and these satellite males, as I said, are born as such. They will never turn into the big males. They are medium males. They become reproductively capable in about 5 years, and they will mate together with the large ones. And they have a courtship ritual that involves, dancing and rubbing genitals and the whole bit. And then when a female comes, yeah, she likes the big guys, but she also likes paired guys. And the fact that all of these morphs exist and are stable across generations shows that there's some important social functions. The smallest males are called sneakers. And I probably don't need to say much more about what their reproductive strategy is. They dart in as fast as they can while they're observing spawning, and they try to squirt some sperm during courtship, and they get 10% of the paternity by just sheer theft. Interestingly, And I was turned on to this example from a student in my class who was reading the papers. These satellite males can sire 40 to 60% of the offspring in a given year, and yet they were ignored. The scientists themselves did not concentrate on their behavior. They didn't understand it. They didn't know what they were up to. They thought they were runts or young ones. They were only concentrating on the large male behavior. But it turns out there are three flavors of male in sunfish, and they all get some share of the paternity each year. And who knows about the females? All we really know is that they school together and they come in for spawning day, which takes place in one day a year. Sometimes the cycle can repeat in warmer climates, but generally one time a year. And they squirt their eggs and go. There's no parenting. The males spend about 2 weeks building a nest and then 2 weeks defending the fertilized eggs. And a lot of them die in the process, which we think is partially why these other strategies exist, is that it's pretty tough to be a full-time dad for a month, 2 weeks before spawning, 2 weeks after. A lot of males die from starvation during that time. Satellite males have also been discovered in many species of birds. So this is a ruff. And ruffs also exist in leks, where they have these territories where the males will fight with each other over who can have the largest territory. Yet these white ruffed versions of males can move through the territories unbothered by any of the males. They're not territorial towards them. And for some reason, the presence of these satellite males attracts females. And here's an interesting story of gender in birds. These are white-throated swallows. So you can see this white patch here is how they got their name. White-throated swallows come in two morphs, white-striped and tan-striped. The white-striped are larger, they're territorial, and they're nest builders. The tan-striped are better at provisioning food and caring for offspring. So you have the more domestic morph and the more territorial morph. These always pair together. But interestingly, these come in male and female varieties, and these come in male and female varieties. And so they have completely decoupled sex and gender, where they know that the two behaviors are complementary. And in many species, you would divide that up as males and females. But in this particular species, male and female is irrespective of their morphology or their behavior. And scientists have actually discovered why. There's a huge supergene, which is a group of linked genes, that conveys both the morphology and the behavior, and it's not on a sex chromosome. So normally these kind of gendered behaviors are on a sex chromosome, and that's why it would segregate with sex. But in this case, it's not. It's on one of their regular autosomes. And so these, what we would consider gendered behaviors, are irrespective of sex. So here's a final example of gender that I would tell you from a species that's much more close to home. This is the common chimpanzee. So they're our closest living relative, separated from us by about 6.5 million years of evolution. This is a chimpanzee. Well, chimpanzees have a patriarchal society, very male-dominated, fairly aggressive, very hierarchical. So dominant status really determines a lot of privileges and behaviors, from feeding privileges to sexual behaviors. They have a ranked hierarchy, and it's kind of nasty to be a chimpanzee, actually. The females are constantly harassed by the males. Males are constantly fighting each other. It's really not, actually, they're not very pleasant species. But this species, or this individual, her name is Donna, and she's different. And that was the title of the book that was written partially about her by Franz de Waal, excuse me. She isn't in the dominance hierarchy. She moves in and out of it without any trouble. She's very popular. She was famous for resolving conflicts and building alliances. And all of the time she avoided the harassment and aggression that almost every other chimpanzee suffers. How did she do that? She is asexual. She has shown no interest in sex with either sex, either gender, and she has no children. And so she has no really need for the dominance hierarchy. It doesn't make any difference to her. She doesn't care about her place. And instead, but she is a form of social glue in her group. Now, this is a group that lived in captivity, so we don't know if this kind of thing exists in the wild, but her particular gender expression, if you will, gets her out of the game that really harassment and dominance, and she had a fairly pleasant life. And whether or not her role in the group was really beneficial overall, it remains to be seen. This has to be studied in more detail. But just so you don't think I'm a wacko for thinking these things, Franz de Waal is probably the most accomplished primatologist since Jane Goodall. I mean, probably the only primatologist that rivals Jane Goodall, and he was elected to the National Academy of Science. He's pretty famous if you don't know who that is. I'm parroting his words here, not my own. So we talked about sex, we talked about gender, and I will talk very briefly about same-sex sexual behavior just because I can't not mention it. But this is the one that's kind of the least surprising for people. We've kind of this has kind of been out there for a while. So the idea that animals engage in same-sex sexual behavior isn't as controversial.
It depends on which group of people. I have heard countless people call into, atheist call-in shows who are religious. No, animals don't do that.
I mean, animals definitely do that.
It's not natural.
In fact, there was this video that went viral about a preacher in Uganda saying, even dogs don't do that. Has anyone ever seen a dog?
Does he not have
dogs will
dogs?
hump anything. They'll hump your leg. They'll hump a cushion. They'll hump anything. Anyway, I want to start this section by talking about a headline that appeared in the Independent in UK. So there was a British tourist on safari in South Africa, and he snapped this picture of two male lions having sex, and we presume they're two males, and they do appear to be, not just the mane, they're much larger. And this was so controversial that the Independent wrote a story about these two males having sex. Well, let me tell you who was completely unbothered by those males having sex, and that's the female sitting right there. The reason why she's unbothered is this is very normal behavior for lions, because it turns out that in one particular region of Kenya called the Tsavo region, is pretty much the only place where you have lion prides in the single male and harem of females lifestyle. We've all been taught that that's how lions live. You have a single male, king of the jungle, and then 7 or 8 females who are like their sister wives, and then the cubs. And it is true in one region of Africa, that's how they live. But in most of the rest of the continent, you actually have multi-male, multi-female prides, and they generally sex segregate for most of their life. They come together for procreation, for sex when females are in heat, but they spend most of their time with the males congregating with other males and females congregating with females. And within those groups, they're constantly having sex with each other. The sex that they have promotes social cohesion and alliance building. And if you're wondering what the purpose is, of course, we always want to have a purpose, right? Well, in the prides where you have a single male, where are the other males, right? So a lot of straight guys think this sounds great. They're like, oh yeah, that'd be great to have one male and 7 or 8 females. Because they say that because they assume they're one of the males that's going to get 7 or 8 females. If you do the math, where are those other males? They die trying, right? They get killed by other males. They die as frustrated virgins, or they die after maybe taking a harem for a little while. And even if you get a harem, you're constantly looking over your shoulder. You have a giant target on your back if you are a single male in a harem. But if you live in a multi-male harem, it's a peaceful, sex-filled life. So the idea, and are they having some kind of dominant struggle in this moment? I don't know. They seem to both be enjoying themselves to me. But one of the things that irritates me about this photo is that when it comes to same-sex sexual behavior, people always picture this and take pictures of this. But same-sex sexual behavior is also this. These males spend time in affectionate contact. They're affiliates, they're friends, they're lovers. It's not just about the fucking, right? It's also about the alliance building and the affection and the mutual aid. These are real partnerships, and these animals spend a lot of time in affectionate contact. So same-sex sexual behavior is found in basically all social animals. And I do use that adjective social, and I'll come back to that in a second. It's been well documented. Name your favorite species, and you'll find that they do that. These are the penguins that were from the Central Park Zoo. They were famous. It was in the New York Times. Roy, his name is Roy and Silo, and they had a baby called Tango. And the way they had a baby is the zookeepers took an egg that was abandoned by a heterosexual couple, and they gave it to Roy and Silo, who very dutifully incubated it, hatched it, and reared the offspring. And it made the New York Times when this happened. Of course, penguin biologists all over the world were completely confused why this was newsworthy, because they see male-male pairings in penguins all the time. And in fact, there has been a story a few years before that from the Coney Island Aquarium, which is just a few miles, also in New York City, of gay penguin families. And as you can see, people talk about gay giraffes, how giraffes, most of their sex life is actually same sex. And that's because, once again, we see a lot of sex segregation in their social life. The males congregate together, the females congregate together. These are bonobos, so that's the other species of chimpanzee. They're famously lesbian in the sense that it's a matriarchal society where the females have lots and lots of sex with each other. And they do dominate over males, generally through cooperation with each other. Homosexuality has been very well studied in bighorn sheep by a colleague of mine called Charles Roselli. These are albatrosses. Albatrosses were one of the first birds where this is very well documented. And I love this story because this is also in Hawaii. A study came out that about 1/3 of the couplings of albatrosses were female-female. And it was a big surprise to the community. But that surprise didn't last very long, because as more and more testing was done, this is a universal feature of albatrosses. The only way that we didn't know that until 2008 is because no one had checked. Albatrosses don't have sexual dimorphism, so the females and the males look identical. Even an experienced ornithologist can't tell them apart. They look really much the same, and it turns out that females often form pairs with other females. And their eggs are very, very large, so only one can get pregnant a year, and they take turns. So it's not just a numbers game that like two females can create, twice as many. They don't actually have more children. They just seem to prefer each other for whatever reason. And then two other examples I put on this. Well, actually, let me talk about three quick examples. I want to mention the garter snake, since that came up. I mentioned that at the beginning, that these mating balls that happen when the males come out of hibernation, that's an example of sex being used deceptively, right? So by putting out these female pheromones, they're able to trick other males into mating with them. Another example is here we have the bed bug. So that's the traumatic insemination. So what happens is a bed bug will mate, unless a male bed bug mates with a female by injecting sperm into her abdomen. Females do not have a vulva, so they have no way to accept the penis. The only way to do it is to stab. Interestingly, though, the males will only mate with a female who has recently fed. So they're only attracted to females who have eaten recently, because bedbugs can go a very, very long time without eating, up to a year without eating, and they only eat mammal blood pretty much. And so they'll wait around for a long time for a meal. And then when a male senses a female has recently fed, he sees her as a good investment. And so he will chase her and court her and inseminate her if he can. Males will also inseminate each other. So a male will go after another male and traumatically inseminate. And this is injurious to the male, and it's probably a competitive event. But interestingly, and scientists have claimed that this is mistaken identity, that the bedbugs just can't tell each other apart. And since it's traumatic insemination anyway, he doesn't know if it's a male or female and doesn't care. Well, it turns out, though, that males will inseminate other males regardless of whether or not they've recently fed. But when it comes to females, they'll only inseminate them if they have recently fed. So what this tells us is they can tell each other apart. The males know who is male and female, and they care if a female has been fed, but they don't care if the male has, because the male, they're having sex to injure him as a rival, whereas a female, he is having sex with her in order to inseminate. So they know the difference, and this is not just mistaken identity.
Oh, so is that one of the things we left out of the reasons for sex?
That's right. Competition, injury.
That's right.
And here's another one that we left out. So these are flower beetles, the same kind of beetles that you can get in your pantry. And these flower beetles, males will mate with other males and inseminate them. But the reason they do it, and this isn't injurious, the reason why they do this is because the male who is mounted will then go and mount females and will often transfer the sperm that he received along with his own to that female. And that's called secondary sperm transfer. So the male who inseminates another male can actually boost his own paternity by having sex with other males because they'll then go be his foot soldiers and transfer some of his sperm to females. And the males who won't do this sire fewer offspring than the males who will. So it's an evolutionary benefit to be engage in same-sex sexual behavior. So that's the chapter on same-sex sexual behavior. Then I go and I take apart monogamy, and then I go and talk about all the various reasons why we have sex, and some of them will be from earlier chapters, and some will be new. And I finally get around to applying all this to humans. So I look at human sexual diversity across other cultures and time periods in chapter 6. In chapter 7, I look at the complicated way that sex is generated even in humans, that chromosomal sex, and it doesn't always correlate, and there's a lot more diversity than is commonly understood. I finally discuss some of the research into homosexuality in humans, and I demolish the notion that there's any such thing as a gay gene. And then, of course, I bring it back to the conclusion. And I would give you my conclusion now, but then you wouldn't go read the book. So I can't do that. I have to leave you wanting a little more. But anyway,
wise marketing, Nathan.
Yeah, well, why would you buy the book if I gave it all away? But I do offer what I think is why sexual and gender diversity is not just normal, but expected and important in the human species. And that's where I get from my conclusion. So I do want to take a minute and just recommend some other books that are on this topic, various aspects of this topic. Evolution's Rainbow was the book that inspired me 20 years ago, but there's a lot of books coming out. These two books here, this one by Augustine Fuentes, well, actually, it's probably out now. I think these are both out this month. Many of you have probably heard of Sex at Dawn. I highly recommend these two books about females. One focusing on human evolution and one focusing on females in all animals. I'm very delighted to know both of these women, and these books are fantastic. Again, this book, especially Bitch, just really changed my view of everything. But I recommend all of these books for various reasons. And with that, I would be happy to take questions. I just do want to mention that the impetus that made me write this book was my increasing frustration at society's response to sex and gender diversity in our species. Sex and gender diversity is normal, natural, expected part of an animal social life. It's always been there. What we're seeing now is a reclaiming of some of that diversity that has been clamped down by social controls, and social controls that are fairly recent. If we go back even to the ancients, they had more tolerance towards sexual diversity. But if you go prehistorical, you would see that gender diversity really flourished in our species. And there's nothing wrong with any of these individuals up here. They're normal, natural, fertile, and they're flawless and beautiful exactly as they are. They're part of the rich tapestry of gender diversity in our species, and I hope we can celebrate that. And at the very least, they're not hurting you. They're just living their life. Even if you don't like it or don't want to be around it, that's fine. They're not hurting you. So with that, I would be happy to take any questions that you have.
Rob, what do you want to start
Well,
with?
the first one was, I think I know the answer to this, but I'm not actually positive, so I'm going to definitely ask it. Do any non-human animals have a monthly menstruation the way humans do?
That's a great, fascinating question. And you know why? Because menstruation, as we know it, is actually not very common. What you have in most mammals is an estrous cycle, not a menstrual cycle. And it's some of the biology of it is flipped around. And the way that it matters socially is that the obvious conspicuous time for most mammals, that's when they're fertile. So when there's blood and engorgement of the genitals, that they're advertising their fertility. Humans have concealed ovulation. And so the part that's conspicuous and visible is when females are not fertile. That's the least fertile time of the month. And the time when they're the most fertile is a mystery, even to themselves. So the idea that humans have concealed ovulation rather than advertised ovulation has been a key part of our evolution of sexual behaviors. People debate about what it means. What I believe it means is it's a key part of development of pair bonding in humans, because remember that our closest relatives don't pair bond. Neither species of chimpanzee have pair bonds. They have social bonding, they have friends and alliances, but they don't form stable pair bonds.
Do
But
other great
somewhere
apes not menstruate? Is that
no,
true?
they have estrus cycles, right? They have estrus cycles. The other apes do. And so when and gorillas do pair bond, but it's not quite one to one. But chimpanzees don't at all, and orangutans don't. So we think that somewhere along our lineage, specific lineage, menstruation, concealed ovulation, and pair bonding, because humans are pretty pair bonded, even though it's across cultures you see lots of varieties, but still the pair bond seems to be not quite universal, but very common. So pair bonding and concealed ovulation seem to be connected, and menopause as well, but that's another story. But yeah, concealed ovulation is one of the greatest mysteries, I think.
Well, that reminds me of another book by Franz de Waal, the Are Humans Smart Enough to Know How Smart Animals Are? And I'm like, wait a minute, even bed bugs can tell the difference. And they're like, ooh, that one just ate, it's time. And we're over here having no idea. So just
I love
throwing
that
that
book,
out.
by the way. The one you mentioned is my favorite book of his. Yeah.
Yes, mine too. I love it. It's great. Okay, so next question. Outside of zoos, does parthenogenesis most often happen in isolated small habitats like islands?
Well, I don't know about islands, but isolated individuals is where we've observed it, the invertebrates. So among vertebrates, the species that it's been found in have been isolated individuals. So it seems to be consistent with the notion that if an animal has been socially isolated for an extended period of time, that flips on the switch to allow parthenogenesis. It's pretty speculative because we just don't have a lot of information about it. But
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is another interesting evolutionary question. How far back in animal evolution can we trace the evolution of two types of gametes? Were all animals originally hermaphroditic, and did separate sexes evolve independently multiple times?
that's a great question. In animals specifically, the earliest animals did not have different kinds of gametes. So there was just one. There were mating types, and we probably don't have a good idea about how that evolved. But somewhere quickly, you ended up with what's called ansiogamy, which is two shapes, two sizes, basically, with the gametes. And it was animals were hermaphroditic, and we think that the reason why you ended up with a small gamete and a large gamete is it solves a lot of the technical challenges of fusing two cells together. Because two cells fusing into one is quite a challenge, right? There's just lots of machinery that the cell doesn't need two of, and because when a sperm and egg fuse, it's really just the chromosomes that get squirted in from the sperm. The sperm does not provide very much to the zygote. It's really just the chromosomes, and so that seemed to be a simpler system. And is putting the large gamete and the small gamete into different individuals clearly came later because all of the oldest lineages of animals are hermaphroditic. And so in other words, sexual development followed several phases. And hermaphroditic was the dominant one. And then we think actually that males evolved first and then females second. But even that we're not really sure about. You just make inferences based on the oldest lineages that are still around. The problem is gametes don't fossilize, right? So we can only make educated guesses. We're not really sure.
Somebody's got to build a time machine one of these days and use it for more productive stuff than going back and making sure your parents, dance together and kiss at the
Yeah.
dance.
Okay, so next up we have, ooh, this sounds like the answer might be that they have to buy your book and read the last chapter, but maybe you can give us a little bit of a spoiler. They said, I heard that there were a cluster of genes associated with homosexuality and with transgender in humans, and the gay community convinced researchers not to look too deeply. Is that true?
Not at all true. That is not at all true. The largest study that was done was a genome-wide association study done by 23andMe and the biobank in the UK. It involved tens of thousands of individuals, and it was the most comprehensive one. And they found very weakly scoring genetic elements spread over all of the chromosomes. And there were weak associations all throughout, literally hundreds, might have even been thousands of genetic elements that were weakly correlated with same-sex attraction. And the conclusion of this is to say, because people say, is being gay genetic? I always say yes, but not like having blue eyes is genetic. It's more like having a kidney is genetic, meaning hundreds or thousands of genes are involved, all of which are also involved in other things. The only traits that'll have simple genetics are very recent traits. Very old, the older the trait, the more diffusely genetic it will be. So because sexual behaviors go all the way back to the earliest animals, the genes for that, for libido, for sex drive, for pursuing that are going to be so diffuse and so connected to every other things that you cannot isolate this variable. And researchers have been trying. They have been trying. The closest that they came was they found this region on X chromosome called XQ28. And this region had such a weak association, but people did focus on it because it was on the X chromosome and it followed matrilineal inheritance the way that homosexuality weakly does. But once again, when they bared down on it, all of the studies, came up empty. So there is not a gay gene. There is not even a cluster of genes. There is diffuse genetic elements all throughout the genome, all of which do other things as well. So it's not cleanly genetic. It's diffusely genetic.
Okay, follow-up question, and I have to admit I haven't gotten all the way to the end of the book yet, so you may already speak to this in the book, but you mention about how one way that some researchers have kind of turned this idea on its head is by investigating, instead of wondering like, why are these certain animals, engaging in same-sex behavior, instead looking at why would they not be, because you mentioned about how there are various benefits and reasons for that behavior, and due to the way that reproduction has kind of evolved over time in various ways, it might actually make more sense to have sex with all of the the group that you're in the social species. Has anyone kind of turned that question on its head with humans as well, and looked to see for the people who are exclusively heterosexual, is that a gene? Like what made you so straight? I mean, I imagine it's probably a social answer, but
yeah, well, I mean, I think that both ways of asking the question are missing the point. I think that exclusive heterosexuality and exclusive homosexuality, you don't really see much of that in the animal world, right? What you see are shades of bisexual or pansexual, you know what I mean? I mean, very few animals only have sex with the same sex, right? And that's why people don't draw it as a connection to humans. But the thing that I would say is that human sexuality is very much influenced by social forces, right? And your attractions. And we know this because, what's considered attractive changes in historical times and places and things like this. So we know that the social milieu that you're raised in, influences your sexual attraction. Well, what we have and what we have had for quite a while is a social order that forced you to take a side, right? And to choose an identity. And that when that happens early on, aversions can develop. And so, aversion, that's what we're really talking about here, is aversions, because attractions only get you so far. A straight person isn't straight because they're attracted to the opposite sex, because bisexuals and pansexuals have that too. They're straight because they're averse to to having sex with the same sex. That's almost certainly the result of social conditioning. And I don't mean it's not real. Social conditioning is real. And especially as it takes shape, through childhood and puberty, it's not something that would easily change. Um, and, but if you look at most LGBTQ individuals, a lot of them have had sex with the opposite sex and probably could if they had to, and nobody calls that the prison phenomenon, right? They just, what you have though is an increasing pressure, especially during puberty, to define yourself and then also remember this is reinforced by experience, and that experience will come from pornography, it'll come from whatever. And so you might have a more generic sexual attraction that then takes shape because of what you act on, what you're exposed to, and all of that. Now, this is getting outside of my area of expertise, and I don't cover any of this in the book, but I do think that human sexual categories are much more strict and hard than we see in any other animal, and I think it's got to be social influences.
That makes sense to me.
Yeah, so I'm going to repeat a story that Matt Dillahunty has told publicly many times in the past, at least on the Atheist Experience. Maybe he still tells it on the line. But it's like he was raised as a fundamentalist Christian, and he used to be revolted by seeing two men kiss. And then in his current day, he went to the wedding of two male friends, and he thought it was wonderful.
Yeah.
And he realizes the difference there and what made him feel that way initially.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that explains a lot of the aversion. It's typically the moral repulsion, but picture it this way: if you were a 5-year-old, 4-year-old boy in Greece and you're approaching puberty, right? The pederastic relationship was a mentoring relationship between an older man and a pubescent boy. This is not moral approval by any way. I'm just commenting that it happened. If you were averse to that, you would have come with tremendous social costs. You have missed out on an important relationship in your formation as a male in that time and place. And accordingly, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, they all engaged in this relationship, and they, for all intents and purposes, had wives and families, later on and all that. So we can assume that their attraction to women was unaffected. I don't know. I think Socrates might have been a bachelor, but what you see in the ancient descriptions of homosexuality, wasn't usually at the exclusion of heterosexual relationships as well.
Fascinating.
But I do think that there's a lot of pressure to take sides right now. And because we have this social order, especially when it comes to gender, we have two buckets, male and female. And like, which one are you in? And so that's why, we now call it transgender individuals, but for a long time they were called transsexual. And the attitude was largely accepting, because the early wave of this, socially was, well, you left your sex and you joined the other one fully and completely, and you were passing now, and the social order of two sexes was upheld, so we could be okay with that, but now the transgender community is embracing a much more kind of gender fluid, gender creative approach to all this, and that's what's so upsetting to people, because now the whole social order is thrown out. We don't have our two bucket system that but if you go out in nature and you look at other animals, they don't have a two bucket system. They have a much more creative and diverse approach to this. And I think that that's our natural tendency too.
Okay, so one of the
Black and
earlier
white thinking is
questions
so
seems
much
to be
easier than
a really good
nuance.
follow-up to this. Let me ask that one now. So humans sometimes suffer prejudice, negative responses from our peers if we defy their expectations of sex and gender roles. Do other species have anything similar to prejudice towards nonconformity of sex, gender, or sexual behavior?
Um, I, I've gotten asked this question a few times, and I nothing comes to mind, and I've poked around a little bit. I don't think I haven't seen um like punishments doled out for sexual infractions. And animals do have behavioral codes that will involve punishment sometimes. They have, expectations for behaviors. And I'm not aware of that when it comes to sexual behaviors. So
Okay,
I don't know, is the answer.
that's
I
fine.
don't know.
All right. So then the next one is I hear that I hear a lot that intersex conditions go unnoticed in humans. Now and then people will bring up PCOS as something that might be considered intersex. What's the debate there? And are there other differences in sex development that are controversial?
Yeah, so I do talk about intersex individuals in chapter 7 of the book. The So for a long time, sexual variation, particularly in anatomy, it's a disgusting history. Children were born with atypical anatomy, and they were immediately sent for surgical correction, that kind of thing. Before any questions were asked, it was just shoot first, ask questions later. And in fact, most of this variation is described as disorders of sexual development, DSD. But the community itself is embracing the term intersex more and more, to label that they are variants, they're variation, sometimes anatomical, sometimes chromosomal, sometimes hormonal, and that doesn't necessarily need to any intervention. A lot of individuals who grow up without that intervention, when they're old enough to choose it themselves, they don't. Because what they would be doing is correcting their body to make it more palatable to other people, and really this variation is normal, it's natural, and it doesn't necessarily involve a loss of fertility or function in any way. It's just different, and there are mechanisms that we understand for some of it regarding androgen sensitivity or fetal exposure to androgens. There's lots of mechanistic detail for some of the larger categories, um, and this gets into and there are chromosomal variations as well. Klinefelter syndrome have an XXY chromosomal makeup, and then there are Turner syndromes that only have a lone X, and triple X. There's variations on that, and before we get too, medical about it, we have to remember that all those sex determination systems that we saw in animals began as variation, and variation is constantly being produced. We have a genome that is designed to mutate at a certain rate, right? And in fact, different species have a mutational rate that can be dialed up or down by evolutionary forces, because in general, mutation is good. Mutation is what creates variability and variation on which natural selection can operate. The only way, animals can be adapted to their environment fairly well, but the environment's changing. So what happens when they overfit to their environment? They can't change. And so when something comes around, some catastrophe or new challenge, invasive predator, whatever, they're screwed. So our genomes are designed to constantly introduce these little tweaks everywhere. Some of it's genetic, some of it's epigenetic, some of it's sporadic. And these changes and these variations are a good thing in general, because if the particular variation is bad, it will go away in the population. But if it's neutral, it'll be maintained as a buffer, as a reservoir of genetic variation for an uncertain future. It's an insurance policy. You can't possibly predict what the challenge is around the corner. So nature's solution to that is to have variation. And for some reason, variation of sex has been very, very singled out for prejudice and for our it really draws the ire when you have this variation. And people talk about Michael Phelps, for example, has a couple of variations that give him an advantage in his sport. He has a variant in how he processes lactic acid so that he can work a lot harder before his muscles fatigue. He has a couple other, because he's had his genome sequenced. These are natural variations, and that part of what makes him such an incredible athlete. I would argue that every elite athlete must have some of these. Elite athletes, by definition, are not normal, right? They're at the extremes of performance. But when you have that variation in your sexual anatomy, it's immediately, the medical model is applied and you're ostracized. And, if you were in a religious community, you can imagine all the horrors that come to those individuals. So variation is normal and natural. Sometimes it's good or bad for your function. But intersex individuals have been pretty singled out for our derision, and prejudice. And worse. I mean, they're abandoned by the village and things like that, for a long time.
All right.
Okay, so I have another one, which looks like it's a good question here. Um, Can you speak much on interspecies sexual behaviors? And the person said, I've heard very interesting things about otters.
Yeah, so when different species can come together in interesting ways, even when they don't hybridize, and this is another example of is it a use of a sexual behavior that for an animal to seek its own ends? Is this mistaken identity? I don't know. I mean, you definitely see partnerships among animals of different species, which could never, be a reproductive partnership. But you do see these partnerships across species. And again, if you think of nature as just tweaking variants and random behaviors that either take hold or don't, I don't think it's altogether that surprising, especially when you consider that sexual behaviors are linked to the reward center of the brain, right? So it feels good, pleasure, feels good to an animal. And so the fact that you would have spurious sexual activity really shouldn't be that surprising.
Okay, so another question that we've got from a couple of people is, does anyone ever accuse you of bias because you're a gay man writing about same-sex scientific topics, and how do you manage that?
So, you'd be very surprised to hear that if it's happening, I haven't heard much about it. It hasn't been like lobbed at me in public. I'm sure there are some people who that's at least privately why they don't take this seriously and why they think that that I have an agenda on that front. I mean, I can't claim to not have a dog in this hunt. I mean, obviously, but I mean, I think everybody has a stake in this to a certain extent. And so, that same claim could be made in the other direction. So I just simply try to report animal behavior and I offer my interpretation, but I'm not going to shy away from the topic because I'm afraid of being accused of being biased. I think that the tide has turned biologically. We're more but I think it's true that queer scientists were more likely to study this and write about it. And partially because they were feeling vindicated and relieved, and they wanted to tell their conspecifics about this. But that's changed, and some of the biggest work on this is by cisgender heterosexual scientists. It's not queer. It's not just queer scientists. Um, but things have changed really really quickly.
Yeah, well, and I mean, I think we've had plenty of heteronormative, sexist, and other small-minded biases that we've had to deal with all this time in scientific research. So,
That's right. And I talk about that a
yay.
little bit in the book about how much that really did color the research that was done. But I don't focus on the individuals. I focus upon the community that was forming these ideas, the Victorian ideals, because biology as a discipline really grew up in the 19th century and became a serious discipline in the 19th century. And so the early days reflected the morals of the time and the ways of thinking about animal behavior of that time. And that's not the fault of the individuals. So I'm not pinning it on Darwin or Lorenz or any of these individuals. I'm just saying that the society wouldn't have thought about behavior in these ways. And now we can, and now we do. And one influence the other, and yeah.
Well, I definitely appreciate you having the conversation and moving that forward. It's about damn time. So thank you for that.
And I have
Um,
good news to report on that front. So like today, right before I got home for this, I was speaking to graduate students at Rockefeller University, and I mean, the young scientists are very eager for this and are very heartened by this and encouraged by this, and not just the queer ones, right? And in fact, actually, the week that this book came out, I was invited to give a talk on the book at the evolutionary biology group at Washington University in St. Louis. And this is a very, very prestigious institution and a storied evolutionary biology department. To be honest, I was a little nervous I got the invitation only about 3 weeks ahead of time, and I almost declined it because I didn't feel like I could be ready for that audience. This is not just a general audience. This is experts. These are people who know animal behavior much better than I do. So I was a little nervous, but I decided, not to chicken out, and I, spent 3 weeks really preparing hard. And so all of the research I talk about in the book, I went back to the original papers and got the charts and graphs, and I really presented it in a data-driven format. And wow, the reaction was really interesting because there were maybe, let's say, 50 people in the room. Maybe 10 of them were, tenured professors. And I'm guessing that because of the number of gray hairs. And, there was a lot of just kind of squinting and furrowing of brows and just kind of, because I think as we get older, our brains calcify a little bit in our way of thinking. But I'm approaching that myself, right? But among the graduate students, postdocs, and early career scientists, they were having it. They were loving it. They were seeing it in their own work, and they were really eager to hear this being presented. And they were like, they were like, yes, 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 we do see that. And we do see our colleagues only focusing on the typical male and the typical female and ignoring all of this variation that we see in their favorite species. So I was encouraged by that, and they were encouraged to go and do that. And I remember that biology in a lot of ways is the science of the exceptions. And to study that variation is, if you don't study the variation, you're not getting the full picture. And I think that message was well received. It was a great talk. The reception afterwards lasted an hour and a half, and I think that the tide is changing, and there are people publishing on this kind of stuff, all the time.
Good to hear
Well,
that.
I'm really glad to hear that. And you're right. I think even just a few years ago, this was not the kind of conversation that people were having, at least not in biology departments, to my knowledge. The social scientists over here were getting laughed at by the biologists and the hard scientists.
Yeah.
I hate that term.
And animal behavior, like evolutionary biology, is actually one of the most conservative scientific disciplines. And I don't mean conservative on their politics, like in national policy, but I mean in their openness to new ideas, on this kind of thing.
In the original sense of the word, where you just don't want to change your opinion on something.
Yeah, exactly.
The way it's always been thought of is the correct way.
Right. Thank you.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad that we now have more ways to think about things, thanks in part to your awesome book that everybody needs to go out and buy if they didn't already get it last week when I suggested that. Also, it's on Audible, as someone else has mentioned in the chat, so you can get it that way too and have it read to you.
And it's endorsed by Daryl Ray, who's with us right now. His endorsement on the book jacket.
That's right. And I bet he's going to have some more endorsements for it now. So let's wrap up and let him do that. And then we'll move to the Hangout. Thank you, everybody, for coming and joining us. Thank you, Nathan, for sharing your knowledge with us. And I am going to drop your link tree in the chat so
thank you.
Can find more about your work. Absolutely. And don't forget, there's a previous episode. If you liked this one, there's a previous episode that Nathan has done with us about his previous book. So check that one out too. And don't forget to join us next week, same time, same channel. We have a number of people coming up that you won't want to miss, including Dr. Ray will be giving a talk in a few weeks, as well as Stephanie, Daniel. So a few of our own internal folks will be here, myself as well. So we also have other guest speakers too, not just us, but please join us for that. And don't forget to follow us on the social medias. It helps other people find us and get access to our services. Of course, if you are not comfortable liking and sharing things from Recovering from Religion, because that might out you to your social network, that is perfectly okay. Don't do that. But if you are comfortable, please feel free. We are on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Blue Sky, and of course, YouTube. So check us out on all of those places. And Rob, how else can people get involved?
Yes, but I do want to mention first for the people who are watching this on YouTube is in the future when they don't see the Zoom chat that Nathan's link tree is Nathan Lents, no middle initial. All right, so link tr.ee/Nathan Lentz. Okay, so yes, benefiting anyone who volunteers here is something you feel like you're helping people because you are helping people because it's a way to heal yourself. If you've been, especially if you've been through this religious deconstruction, and then you realize how beneficial it is to do that. When people reach out to us who want help, it really feels good to be able to help them. All of the services that we offer are provided by volunteers, and we're always in need of more people. Besides doing the helpline, which is either the phone or chat, if you don't want to be that upfront, you can do other stuff that helps all of us. You can find, vet, and post the good resources that helps the clients directly, and our agents give things to the clients to help them. You can help hosting support groups. You can support the online community that we talked about before. We need moderators in each of the 30 or so channels. We even need IT people to improve our software so that it can, make it easier for agents to help the clients and for clients to use the software. So to apply as a volunteer, fill out the volunteer form on our main page. There's a tab at the top. Go to recoveringfromreligion.org/volunteer. And lastly, I'll say that we have a very concise 3-minute video on our main page. It's called RfR What We Do, and it goes through in 3 minutes what Cara and I took 15 minutes to tell you about in the beginning. All the services that we offer here, and it's great to remind yourself of those things or to send anyone else who you might think might benefit from our services.
All right. And that doesn't just mean, your religious family members that you're currently in a feud with, but you can send it to them too, if you want to.
Yeah, those are the only people
Okay.
I can't send it to because, it just wouldn't do any good. They're too far
That's
gone.
not a good conflict
No.
resolution
No,
technique that I just
it is not.
suggested.
It is not.
FYI.
But it would be the
Okay.
equivalent of then sending me, religious YouTube videos, but I'm not going to retaliate, so I won't do it.
You're a better person than I am, Rob. I'm not going to say that I've never sent retaliatory YouTube links to anyone. Okay, and with that, Dr. Ray, would you like to give us some constructive comments?
I sure would. Nathan, thank you. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed this. It was a great review. I've read your book, and I want to tell everybody, you will walk away with a new understanding. This is a good summary, but the book, you need to read the book. There's so much more in there. And that question about, whether you are biased or not, it's a ridiculous, all of us have biases, that's for sure. But I thought you were extremely fair-minded. And I thought you openly said, admitted your own potential biases. So, I just felt like you put a lot of thought into that, and I appreciated that you
Thanks a
were
lot,
just
Darren.
right up front in that. And I was more than happy to endorse it.
Thank you.
I get
appreciate it.
dozens of books a year, and I don't endorse very many of them, but yours was well worth it.
Thank
In
you.
your conclusion, people go read his book, but read the conclusion, because just one sentence out of the conclusion: sex and gender diversity is a feature of our species, not a bug. That one sentence is worth the whole book, I thought, because that's kind of what you're trying to say, and open people's minds up. I'm giving a keynote speech at the American Humanist Association next month, and I'm in the same nervous area you were, going to St. Louis.
Yeah.
But because I'm speaking on this very issue in some ways, a very different angle. But I'm going to be referencing your book. I'm going to be referencing Lucy Cook's book. I'm going to be referencing Barash and Lipton's book. Are you familiar with that? The Myth of Monogamy?
Yeah.
They endorsed my book, by the way. So we're just kind of passing this along.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, it really was. And I really agree with your two buckets. I think the whole notion, the existence of the trans community is a direct threat to the paradigm that we've lived with, the patriarchal paradigm we lived with in this culture and the planet. Because it's a challenging patriarchal systems, whether they're Buddhist or communist or Hindu. It's challenging everybody at some way. So I think you're absolutely right. And it's going to take some time, but you're also right that there's been a huge amount of change in a really short period of time.
Right.
Cultures don't change as fast as we're seeing this usually. I do have a little pet theory I want to throw out here. Just maybe you mentioned the aversion, the aversion hypothesis you've gotten, and I don't disagree with that at all. I think there's also an element of imprinting that's going on with a 5-year-old, with a 12-year-old, wherever the brain is and wherever the hormones are at that time, whatever they're being exposed to imprints, and especially for males, human males, I'm speaking of. I think some of the fetishes, some of the things that people latch onto at that time in their sexual development, oftentimes stay with them the rest of their life. And I think it could be, I don't know if it's technically imprinting, but that seems to be what it is. And one of my hypotheses is that priests who are, pederasts and molesting children, a lot of them went to seminary and were themselves molested at 13 years of age. And there were no girls around. There was only boys. So their brain is imprinting on who are the appropriate sex objects in my environment. They imprint on those other boys. And then later, they're actually doing what their brain's saying is appropriate. It's heinous, it's criminal, but it's in that way the Catholic Church is creating an imprinted generation of priests that are going to turn around and do exactly what was done to them. I don't know what you think of that theory. If you got a quick response.
No, I agree a lot in the imprinting, and what you're exposed to at certain key elements, beginning in utero, but as you say, even through childhood, and if aversion, and like for example, a lot of like kinks and fetishes very closely follow the taboo of that culture, and so taboos can often lead to this. So sometimes the exposure can go either way, so I think there's a lot to that. Yeah, and
I don't know how you. I don't know how you test that, but I've just observed it literally as a clinical psychologist. I observed this way back in the 1980s when I encountered my first 2 Catholic priests that were secretly coming to me. And I thought, well, this is really confusing until I thought of it in imprinting terms. So anyway, as you know, we encounter a lot of this just through people coming to us. They come to us with religious conflicts around their sexuality, and the vast majority of what I see in our culture is religiously based. And you're fighting a good fight. You're helping us and others to fight back on some of this. Anyway, thanks so much. I really appreciated the talk, and I love this kind of programming that Kara and Robin are bringing to us. We get some pretty cool people like yourself, and it's just kind of fun to be exposed to it. Last but not least.
Yeah, it's been great. It's been great being a part of this community. I do have to bowl. It's 10 o'clock, so it's kids' bedtime. But
go for it.
But I got to bowl. Thank you so much, and I'll be around. You'll see me around in other events.
Thank you so much again.
Good.
All right. Take care, guys.
Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you. You're invited back anytime.
Thank you.